My name is Zaira Livier. I am a co-founder and executive director for People's Defense Initiative. And by default, I am the campaign manager for the Tucson Families Free and Together campaign. So People's Defense Initiative was born just over a year ago. We had our first year in April. And when we founded this organization, which is a C4 organization, so we get to do pretty much unlimited kind of lobbying. We wanted to do policy work. I've been a migrants' rights organizer for some years now, and one of the frustrations for me organizing locally on that level was the follow-through. So after Trump came into office, and even prior to that, there's been massive movements here in Tucson, especially around Sanctuary City. We did massive mobilizations in defense of DACA, against raids, and you name it, but it kind of was all in the same. A lot of reaction, a lot of asking, a lot of not getting anything except maybe for strongly worded letters, or as the city council loves to call them, resolutions. So we thought, I didn't want to start another nonprofit. We have too many already as it is. So it took a while to do a real deep analysis of what hole we could fill. And that was exactly it. It was on the policy side. It was, how do we take these amazing movements on the ground in Tucson, and we have so many, and so many people doing such amazing work, that what we really needed was a conduit to then pull that into the electoral arena, utilizing the tools that we have for direct democracy and citizen-led initiatives are exactly that. So Arizona doesn't have a lot of great ideas, but we do have the ability to run our own citizen initiatives by collecting signatures and getting something on the ballot. And believe it or not, in Tucson, per our charter, you actually don't even need to wait for a ballot. So if tomorrow PDI decided to once again, push for rent control or something, we can collect the signatures, hand it over to the city council, to the clerk's office once again, and they would actually have to call a special election. So a lot of opportunity there for direct democracy, and our big deep belief that when that government is supposed to provide justice and safety to the community, and when they fail to do so, it is up to the community to then do it. And that's exactly what we're doing with this Sanctuary City initiative, which we call Tucson Families Free and Together. And we decided to build this campaign to really create something new, take back the meaning of the word sanctuary and justice and safety, and really run a campaign about truth. And really, put out some hope and some love, and that's what it's really about. We've been very honest about what it is that we're doing, and it's contagious when you speak truth to power rather than do what politicians do, which is talk around an issue a million different ways. We want to really start talking about things in their true form and call them for what they are.
Give us an idea of the effort it's taken to gather the signatures needed to get on the ballot.
Gosh, it's really been a big labor of love. All day in our office today, we've had people from all walks of life come in and turn in petitions that they've been circulating on their own. Thousands of volunteer hours, thousands of shifts out there done by people. It's been difficult, but also really uplifting. Because when we're out there collecting signatures, it's really not what you hear in the media, and it's definitely not what you hear from people that are running for office in Tucson or people that are in office. This is kind of really straightforward for a lot of folks. When you say Sanctuary City, many people can't even wait for you to finish the sentence before they're already taking the clipboard from you. And then there are others who say, what does that mean? And once you explain what sanctuary actually would mean for the city, it's a no-brainer. So people from all sorts of different backgrounds are are so much for this. Of course, there are the stragglers out there that are nasty about it, but they're really a really small percentage of the population. And for the first time, I think maybe in a very long time, if not in history, we have a president of the United States that's actually taking off the veil of what immigration policy actually is in the United States and really showing us what it is. It's policies of death, it's policies of xenophobia, it's policies of genocide, really. So people are triggered. People are really triggered. So even 4 years ago when Obama was in office, you could have walked anywhere in Tucson and said, I want to stop deportations. I want to stop Tucson Police Department for collaborating with Border Patrol and ICE. And a lot of well-meaning people would have said, nah, I don't understand what that means or why. But now that we've seen the children in cages, now that children are dying, now that we've seen family separation, now that we're seeing gassing at the border of refugees, now that we're seeing what these policies actually are, even though those of us who've lived it have been saying it for a very long time, now that the normal liberal in Tucson understands and is faced with the reality and the heartbreak of what this is, people are ready and triggered. So we wouldn't have been able to pass this 5 or 6 years ago. We may not be able to pass something like this 5 or 6 years from now when we're back to having a well-spoken, nice-looking president. But we can now. So Trump has been definitely something horrible for our community, but in a lot of ways, it's finally shown the true face of what, U.S. policy is, and the way that it treats migrants and what that means for us migrants on the ground. So it's closed a lot of doors and windows and has hurt a lot of us, but it's also opened up a lot of new opportunities. And Sanctuary City in Tucson, in Arizona, is one of those.
Can you tell us, how did this initiative come to life? What prompted it? Who crafted it? And what is the strategy behind the language of the initiative?
Mm-hmm. We were organizing a strategy for PDI and a long-term goal. What's the goal? We wanted to build a Tucson where everybody can thrive. Somewhat of a sanctuary for all, and we used that at some point in time. And then we went backwards. So to get to that point, we're talking about a thriving wage, we're talking about childcare, we're talking about jobs, we're talking about, all of these different things. So we worked backwards from there. And knew that in Arizona, in Tucson in particular, we have 3 very pressing issues. We have a ridiculously high poverty rate that hovers around 23 to 24%. We have a really high unemployment rate as well. We have a criminal justice problem, although it's getting better, it kind of goes forward and backward. It's a large nightly population in the county jail. And of course, immigration, because we're 60 miles from the border. We're within the 100-mile radius where we are occupied by Border Patrol, and they can do as they please. And we also have SB 1070 of the books. So we were looking at these 3 issues. We analyzed, as far as immigration, we analyzed the things that we can do on a city level and the things that we can do on a county level, right? Structural changes that we can make to prevent deportation and incarceration of people. So we were kind of working on that end. My brother was murdered. I left to bring his remains back home, which, by the way, it's really the only way to get your loved one back to the United States once they've been deported is dead. And even then, human remains need to have valid passports, or else you have to bring them back as marked as cargo rather than human remains. So when I finally came back, I met with my friend and colleague, Billy Peard, who was at the time with the ACLU of Southern Arizona. And he told me about a family in Flagstaff who was pushing a bill called Frankie's Bill. Frankie was also a young man like my brother, a migrant who had also gotten in trouble. I don't know the particulars of his case, but I know that they related to the SB 1070 in that process. But he had written a sanctuary bill for Flagstaff, and Frankie's family, along with the community, were pushing the city council and mayor to put that into effect in Flagstaff. And he brought me a copy, and I remember us having a meeting and me looking at this and thinking, you know, at the moment, I personally didn't want to do immigration work anymore. As is the day that my brother was murdered, I actually had put together a press conference for the Free the Children Coalition, which I'm also a founder of. Had a press conference that day, had this incredible showing, and then that night my brother gets executed. It's enough to make you want to rethink what you're doing, because you have failed clearly at it. So when he showed me this bill, it gave me a lot of hope, and we took this bill, Frankie's bill, back to the committee, and through a lot of conversations, and in a consensus, we decided that that was going to be our first campaign. Frankie was deported, and then Frankie died by suicide not long after he was deported. So it just felt right to do so. So we took Frankie's bill and we made it into what you see now as Tucson Families Free and Together by adding a lot more teeth to it, making it, again, very particular to Tucson, and as progressive as we can possibly get it, to not just stop deportations, but to really stop people from being criminalized, to really put a lot of barriers between policing and racial profiling, because we don't just want migrants to stop getting pulled over and ticketed. We want people in general, working class, poor people, to stop being pulled over and ticketed, or to be afraid to call the police when they need to, et cetera, et cetera. The lawyers who helped us write it were just there to help us write it, right? They didn't tell us what should be there. So a lot of the parts in there that relate to SB 1070 are written around the edges, and it pushes boundaries most definitely, and that's the point. There are other parts in it that are, you know, brand new, protections for victims of domestic violence and sexual assault. Those are two that are already two of the most underreported crimes in the country. You can only imagine if you're undocumented, or your children are undocumented, or even your aggressor is undocumented, right? Sexual assault almost always happens by someone you know. Domestic violence, obviously, is in your home. Tucson Police has a, when they show up to a domestic violence call, almost always somebody is going to be arrested, or two people will be arrested. So you can only imagine what happens when you are undocumented. And I know, and we know from talking to our community, that oftentimes a victim's documentation status has already been used against them by their aggressor, right? So don't leave me, don't call the police, or I will tell them that you're undocumented, or that you're children, or that you're mother. We basically said, when investigating these types of crime, immigration status is completely off of the table. There's a section there that expedites U visa certification. So when you are undocumented, you are a victim of a crime, you report it to police and you work with police to solve that crime, they are to give you a certification that you then use to apply for a U visa, which gives you a job permit, a work permit, protection from deportation. This process will often, not just with TPD, but in general, take months, sometimes years, sometimes never. So we have it so that they have to review it within 90 days. Our immigrant-friendly general orders that we have now, which are just internal policy and can go away any moment, immigrant-friendly, they allow a police officer to ask you for immigration status based on what you might be wearing, how well you speak English or don't, what your surname is, what your name is. Carload is my favorite one, right? Carload, if that's not like too many Mexicans in a car, I don't know what is. It's a race proxy. We completely outlaw that. So a lot of really common sense things. If you're going to question someone on immigration status, you need to read them their Miranda rights. If you're done ticketing someone, you need to let them know that they're free to go. No more prolonged stops. Real basic stuff.
City Attorney Mike Rankin said that it's very unlikely that federal agencies will cooperate with anything like that. What's your take on his interpretation or his analysis of the MOU?
Well, that's an interesting one because what he was to do is give us a legal analysis, and that's an opinion. It's not an analysis of any kind. In essence, we disagree. The MOU does one thing, which I just mentioned. It tells them that they can't do routine traffic stops. Border Patrol and ICE, that's not what they normally do. They do what they do here. So I really don't see ICE and Border Patrol going, we're not going to sign that, therefore we're not going to do anything anymore. I believe that they will. MOUs are a normal thing. They probably have a ton of MOUs at the moment as we speak. But, you know, that's really my rebuttal to that, is that it's opinion and it's not a legal understanding of the situation. Mm-hmm.
Do you guys consider taking legal action against the city attorney for putting out his legal opinion?
What we're trying to do here is push for sanctuary city and build a movement and build civil understanding in our communities and engagement. And the last thing that we care about is having a big thumb wrestle fight with the city. We don't care, you know? So while their opposition is juicy sometimes and we want to take a bite once in a while, we often remind ourselves that they are not our target. What we're trying to do is save lives. What we're trying to do is keep people from being incarcerated and keep people from being deported, and spending time going after them and their immoral tactics is really last on our agenda. We'd rather be outside talking to people, and that is why we decided not to take any action.
Now that you've met the signature requirement, what are the next steps for your campaign?
So we are going to go into phase 2 of the campaign. First phase was qualifying. Second phase is winning. So this is a mail-in ballot only election, as all of these city elections are. And, you know, we're going to do the old knocking on doors. That's really it. Knocking on a lot of doors, talking to a lot of people, mobilizing the community, continuing to have conversations, pushing the agenda forward, continuing to build the infrastructure, continuing to learn. We're building really a blueprint for other cities to then do this.
What do you have to say to the undecided voter, undecided Tucson voter?
To the undecided voter, I would say that this isn't just a matter of a policy and certain rules and what rule we may be breaking, what law we may be pushing on. It's not just a list of things that we can and cannot do, because those things are just there and they're easy. They're easy things to do. Don't racially profile. Don't question victims of domestic violence and sexual assault on their immigration status. Tell people that they can leave. These are policies. The real question is, what is the message that we're sending and to whom? The undecided voter might be thinking of the state legislature. They might be thinking of the Trump administration. And I'd like them to switch that thinking and instead think of the undocumented people that live in Tucson and think about the message that we're sending to them. And the message that we're sending to them is the opposite of the message that was sent when SB 1070 was signed into law. And 40% of undocumented people fled Arizona. And the rest that stayed made their life very, very, very small. And every time that they leave their house, every time that they drive a car, every time that they come into contact with the police, they are in danger of being detained and deported and ripped away from their family, from their jobs, from their life. So think about the message that we're sending them, that we care about them, that they should be safe here, that we care about their justice, that we want to protect them, And I want them to think about this really on the moral stance of it. This is a campaign about morality and what is right. Law doesn't dictate morality. And when people say that this may break law, the law that they're talking about is SB 1070, a law that criminalizes people like me, people that look brown like me, just for existing in public spaces. So that would be my argument to people. Don't get lost in the policy. The policy is simple. But instead get lost in what we could build. What would happen to a family who is no longer afraid every time they leave their house? What would happen to the friend who has to call her mom every time her mom drives to work to make sure she didn't get pulled over? Imagine how much of a more beautiful community we could have, the inclusivity, the equity that we can build together. And that has been seen in sanctuary cities and counties across the nation when we pass these policies, that it's less of the policy and more of the messaging. So I would tell them that.